If you're new here, don't forget to like, drop a comment, and hit that subscribe button, because what happens in this story will make you question everything the galaxy thought it knew about fear. The great chamber of the Galactic Council shimmered beneath a canopy of artificial starlight. Hundreds of delegates murmured like a low storm, their translucent robes and chitinous armor reflecting the blue glow of the central display. Holographic projections floated in the air, grainy recordings of a creature that made seasoned soldiers swallow hard. It moved like a shadow given teeth, tearing through reinforced armor as if it were soft cloth. Kara, the apex predator of the Zal Dominion. No chains had ever held it for long. No tranquilizer had ever slowed its pulse. Entire military divisions had been shredded in attempts to contain a single specimen. The council chamber carried the smell of ozone and restrained panic, as though the predator's legend itself had seeped into the air. A shivering council aide whispered to another, "It killed 72 in less than a minute. Not one survived." Commander Elias Vance stood among them, not behind the protective glass, not in the shadows, but at the front where the projection burned brightest. The human's black uniform made him stand out amid the sea of ceremonial colors, but he didn't seem to mind the stares. His gaze was fixed, steady, as if the image of Karath was a puzzle he intended to solve rather than a nightmare he wished to avoid. "This isn't bravery," someone muttered in a dialect thick with contempt. "It's ignorance. The humans think everything can be trained." Elias caught the whisper, but his expression didn't shift. He had seen predators before. Not like this one. Nothing in the stars truly compared to Karath, but Earth had its share of teeth and hunger. Wolves had once been monsters too, long before they became something else. A council envoy floated forward, its body a mass of pale tendrils. "Commander Vance. You've been briefed. Containment protocols have failed. Negotiation is impossible. The Zal Dominion refuses to intervene. You understand what stands behind that barrier?" "I do," Elias replied. His voice was calm, almost soft against the echoing chamber. "And I still volunteered." The envoy twitched its tendrils in disbelief. "Do you grasp what you're offering yourself to?" "Not offering. Meeting," he said simply. Beyond the reinforced observation deck, Karath stirred. The live feed zoomed in. Muscles like woven steel flexed beneath charcoal gray plating. Two pairs of eyes flared a dull amber as it paced, silent but for the faint scratch of its claws against alloy flooring. It wasn't just large, it was colossal. Where most predators roared, Karath radiated a kind of stillness that made the room feel smaller, thinner, as if everyone watching it were prey. A Sornian general barked, "This is absurd. No human has stood 10 meters from a karate beast and lived. This is not an experiment, it's suicide." Elias didn't look away from the display. "Then I'll be the first." Laughter rippled through a few alien throats, the cruel kind that comes from certainty. The Karath had ended entire hunting guilds. It was called God-Eater in some quadrants, the Maw in others. No council race had dared approach it unarmed. But the human had signed the waiver. No weapon. No armor. Only a thin layer of fabric and a biometric monitor. The chamber fell into a hush as the escort doors opened and Elias stepped through the decontamination corridor. Cold vapor slid over his skin. The security bulkhead sealed behind him like the closing of a mouth. In the holding arena, Karatha's breath steamed in the artificial chill. The moment Elias crossed the threshold, it stilled. Its head tilted, a slow, predatory arc. He could feel the weight of its gaze settle over him like gravity. The observers leaned forward, expecting a lunge. Elias didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't run. He simply stood there, hands at his sides, posture loose but grounded. He lowered his chin just slightly, a subtle gesture, not of submission but of acknowledgement. Karatha's nostrils flared. Somewhere in the observation deck, a technician's hand hovered over the emergency containment trigger. The creature moved. No sound, just motion, a ripple of muscle and power closing distance with terrifying speed. Elias exhaled, steady and measured. Karath stopped a single arm's length away. Its breath was hot against his face, sharp and metallic. It lowered its head, not much but enough to let the air between them change. And then it waited. The room above erupted with whispers. The predators never waited. They struck. They always struck. Elias met its gaze, unblinking. Something passed between them, not language, not telepathy, just a quiet current. Recognition maybe. Curiosity perhaps. Karatha's pupils narrowed into slits. Vitals stable, someone whispered over the comm, no aggressive movement detected. Elias took a single step forward. The massive creature's claws flexed against the floor, but it didn't attack. Instead, it shifted slightly to the side, pacing, circling him, not as prey but as something it was studying. He matched its rhythm, not mirroring but not challenging either. To anyone watching, it looked like a man walking casually with a loaded railgun pressed to his spine. To Karath it was different. One more step and they were face to face again. Its eyes caught the light, molten gold on black. For an instant, the predator seemed less like a god of death and more like something very much alive, curious, cautious, powerful. On the observation deck someone gasped. Karath had lowered itself slightly, a subtle shift in stance. To anyone who had ever hunted, it wasn't submission. It was recognition of a peer. The envoy's voice was tight. "Commander Vance, what are you doing?" "Not dying," Elias said quietly. Karath exhaled slowly, its breath brushing over his cheek like heat from a furnace. It could have ended him 100 times over by now. Instead it watched. The chamber timer hit the 5-minute mark. No blood. No violence. Just the rhythmic sound of the predator's breathing and the human's quiet resolve. On the other side of the glass, one counselor whispered almost reverently, "It's listening." Karath finally stepped back, tail dragging against the alloy floor with a resonant scrape. Its massive head tilted one last time. Then, in a movement no one on the council had ever witnessed, it sat down. The council chamber erupted into shouts and disbelief. It had never sat for anyone. Elias allowed the corner of his mouth to curve upward. Not triumph. Not mockery. Just quiet acknowledgement. He didn't need to tame it. He only needed to understand. The intercom cracked with urgency, but Elias barely heard them. For the first time in galactic history, Karath had chosen to be still. And somewhere deep in the creature's amber eyes, something ancient flickered, not hunger but the first fragile spark of recognition. The council didn't have a name for it. But on Earth humans had another word. Trust. The council hadn't expected the standoff to last longer than 30 seconds. Yet hours after Elias Vance first stepped into the containment chamber, the galaxy's most dangerous predator remained alive, and so did he. The official reports called it an anomaly. The council guards called it luck. Elias knew better. The creature had made a choice. Now, days later, the corridors of Station Helion carried a new kind of tension. Not the sharp fear that followed Karatha's arrival, but something heavier. Conflicted. Restless. Every alien passing Elias in the hall glanced at him the way one might glance at a man carrying an unstable explosive. A technician from the Sornian delegation actually moved to the other side of the hallway, muttering a prayer to her gods as he passed. He didn't blame them. He'd seen the creature tear apart armored drones in less than a heartbeat. Trust wasn't the logical response. But it was the one he had chosen. The containment arena had been stripped of weapons. No stun rifles. No thermal fences. Just a sterile floor of alloy, a wide space and Karath. The creature paced silently at the far end, a ripple of dark muscle and blade-edged grace. Its breath misted in the cold air, steady and controlled. It had learned to stop thrashing against its boundaries. It simply waited. Watching. Elias entered through the pressure door with a ration container in one hand. No security detail followed him now, none had the nerve. The door sealed behind him with a hiss, leaving only him and the apex predator. The sound of his boots against the metal echoed softly, almost reverent. Karatha's head lifted immediately. It didn't lunge. It didn't growl. It inhaled through those flared nostrils as if cataloging his scent. Elias kept his movements deliberate, fluid. Predators responded to tension and Karath was a master at reading it. He crouched just outside striking distance, cracked open the ration case, and slid the dense protein slabs across the floor. The creature's gaze didn't follow the food at first, it stayed locked on him. The first few encounters had been the same, a silent test. But when Elias neither flinched nor reached for any concealed weapon, Karath finally lowered its head and sniffed at the offering. Watching Karath eat was like watching a storm devour the ocean, quiet but absolute. Its claws grazed the metal flooring with faint clicks. Elias noted the subtle relaxation in its posture, a loosening of those coiled muscles that no one else seemed able to see. "You're not the monster they think you are," he murmured. His voice didn't fill the room, it folded into the silence, measured, calm. Karatha's upper set of eyes flicked toward him at the sound. The lower pair stayed fixed on the food. It wasn't language but something passed through the air, a subtle awareness. Up on the observation deck, a handful of council members watched through the glass. They had been watching every day since the first encounter, waiting for the moment when the predator would finally turn on him. They whispered in the shadows, betting credits on how long the human would last. Elias ignored them. He had more important things to read than their fear. He extended his hand, not to touch, not yet. Just to exist in Karatha's space. The creature stiffened. Its claws flexed. Every sensor on the observation deck blinked into alert yellow. "Come on," Elias breathed. Karatha's jaw opened slightly, revealing rows of polished, bone-white teeth. Its breath hit him like furnace heat. One wrong move and his arm would be gone before the alarms even blared. Then with glacial slowness, Karath lowered its head. Its nose, if you could call that ridge of bone and cartilage a nose, hovered near his palm. Warm breath brushed his skin. It didn't bite. It didn't growl. It smelled. Elias didn't move. That was the point. Above him, someone whispered, "Impossible." A minute stretched. Then Karath exhaled, a low, guttural rumble vibrating through the floor. Not aggression. Something else. Something closer to acknowledgement. Elias pulled his hand back slowly and sat down on the cold alloy, cross-legged, showing the creature his back without hesitation. The entire gallery behind the glass erupted in static-laced protests over the calm, but he tuned them out. Karath circled him with the silent weight of a nightmare on four limbs. Its claws scraped softly, its shadow stretched over him like a living eclipse. When it finally stopped behind him, the entire council held its breath. The predator lowered its head again, this time not to study, but to rest its massive jaw lightly against his shoulder. The observation deck fell into absolute silence. Every training manual, every council study, every survival report on karate behavior stated the same. These creatures submitted to no one. They responded to dominance with blood. Yet here it was, placing the most vulnerable part of its anatomy, a killing jaw, against a human's exposed flesh without striking. Elias didn't smile. He didn't dare break the moment. He just let it happen. His heartbeat slowed until it matched the rhythm of the creature's breathing. That night the feeds went galactic. Billions of beings across dozens of worlds watched in disbelief as a human sat calmly with a Karath draped against him like some feral guardian. The comments ranged from mockery to outright fear. Many called it a staged stunt. Others whispered of something more dangerous. If humans could do this once, they could do it again. Elias returned to his quarters hours later, exhaustion pressing behind his eyes. The door sealed behind him with a whisper, but his mind stayed in the containment chamber. He could still feel the warmth of Karatha's jaw against his shoulder. Not threatening. Just there. His comm pad vibrated. An incoming transmission from the Sornian ambassador lit the screen. The alien's features were sharp and angular, voice like cracked ice. "You're playing with fire, human. And when it burns you, it will burn us all." Elias leaned against the wall, letting the weight of his decision settle like armor. Then maybe fire just needs someone who knows how to hold it. The ambassador hissed and cut the line. He exhaled slowly, eyes unfocused, already thinking ahead to tomorrow's session. The creature hadn't just tolerated him. It had chosen proximity. That wasn't submission, it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Trust from a predator that no one controlled meant loyalty no one could buy. Across the station, Karath lay coiled in its cell, the faint hum of containment fields buzzing like insects. Its four eyes flicked open at the sound of distant footsteps. It didn't growl. It didn't stir. It simply lifted its head and faced the direction of the man who walked those halls. Something inside the galaxy's most feared creature had shifted. And the galaxy, watching from its safe distance, had no idea how dangerous that was going to be. The silence in the containment bay was no longer that of a trapped beast. It was the silence of something waiting, for him. The footage spread faster than any diplomatic statement ever could. Within a single rotation, every major broadcast channel in the Council's network was replaying the same 10-second clip. Karath, the apex predator, lowering its head to a human shoulder like an obedient hound. Billions watched it. Millions refused to believe it. And the Zal Dominion, the species that had once worshipped the creature as a living god, called it an unforgivable insult. Elias had known the world would react. He hadn't expected it to sound like a war drum. The Council's press chamber was built for spectacle. High tiers of hovering delegates circled the floor like carrion birds over a battlefield. Their translators clicked, hummed, and pulsed as dozens of languages collided in real time. Holograms above the chamber displayed still images of Karath at rest near him, the text beneath in a dozen alphabets declaring human commander tamed the untamable. "You turned a divine weapon into a trick beast," snarled the Zal ambassador. His scaled features twisted with something more than fury, it was humiliation. "Do you even comprehend what you've done?" Elias stood at the central podium. The spotlights burned against his uniform, making his silhouette appear sharper, harder. His pulse was steady. He didn't look away. "I didn't tame it," he said evenly. "It came to me." A ripple of disbelief crossed the room. A Zethan delegate hissed through a respirator. "It came to you? Do you think the universe bends around human arrogance?" "This isn't arrogance," Elias replied. "It's observation. Behavior can be read. Instinct can be met. Karath doesn't respond to fear, it respects presence. That's what you never understood." Murmurs thickened like fog. The Zal ambassador slammed a clawed hand onto the railing, the impact reverberating through the chamber. "It's a god of our world. And you've reduced it to a pet." A low hum rippled through the crowd as security drones adjusted their altitude, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Elias didn't flinch. "If it's a god," he said, "then your god made a choice." The words hit the room like a pulse grenade. Delegates hissed, muttered, some leaned forward with predatory interest. Others, those with more tactical minds, stayed silent, calculating. If a creature like Karath could bond to a human, then maybe humanity had a skill that no other race possessed. And in a galaxy where power was currency, that thought was dangerous. On the observation deck high above, Karath moved inside its enclosure, restless but calm. Its breathing was picked up by hidden microphones, transmitted into the chamber. Even without seeing it, the sound of its breath was enough to make many delegates tighten their jaws. It was a reminder of what they were discussing. Not a weapon, not a theory, but a living creature capable of ending armies. Elias left the chamber with the weight of their voices trailing after him. Half of them thought he was a fool. The other half were beginning to fear him. Outside the council wing, the human delegation had gathered in a dimly lit corridor. Captain Imani Rao, his closest ally on the expedition, approached with a data pad clutched in her hand. "The Dominion's mobilizing," she said without preamble. "Not officially, but their fleets have shifted formation. They're calling this blasphemy." He took the pad, scanning the intelligence report. "They think they can take it back," he murmured. "They're not thinking, Elias. They're coming." Her tone carried that razor edge of someone used to bad news delivered under fire. "And the council won't stop them. Too many fear what you represent right now." Elias exhaled slowly. "They should fear Karath. Not me. Maybe they don't see a difference anymore." The containment arena lights burned low when he entered later that night. Karath was awake, standing in the center of the chamber with its head slightly tilted. The heavy metal door shut behind him with a finality that reminded him of a trigger being pulled. Karath approached without hesitation now. Its steps were slow, deliberate, each claw clicking softly against the alloy floor. Elias stopped just short of its reach. The predator lowered itself again, a movement that once seemed impossible, as if acknowledging something only it and he understood. "They're coming for you," Elias said quietly. "Or maybe for me. Probably both." Karath's 4 eyes fixed on him. There was no comprehension in the human sense, but something burned behind that gaze, an intelligence sharp as fractured glass. Its breath was steady, its tail dragging lightly behind it, the movement controlled. Elias extended his hand again, but this time Karath didn't just sniff it. It leaned forward until the top of its massive head pressed against his chest. The gesture wasn't one of submission. It was something else entirely. Trust. Above them, unseen cameras transmitted the moment to the council's security hub. Dozens of alien officers stared at their screens, silent, as a creature that had shredded battalions now stood motionless against a single unarmed human. The first strike came 2 hours later, not with guns but with words. Dominion warships breached the council's neutral space in silent formation. The message was clear: Karath would be returned or it would be taken. Council meetings stretched into the early hours. Threats wrapped in diplomatic phrasing flowed like water through cracked stone. Some delegates argued for compliance. Others saw opportunity. If Karath stayed with the humans, they could balance power against the Dominion for the first time in centuries. Elias listened to every word from the shadows of the chamber. He wasn't a politician and he didn't need to be. He had already seen the truth in Karath's eyes. It wasn't chained. It wasn't broken. It had made a decision. He returned to the containment arena just before dawn cycle. Karath stirred at the sound of his boots, then settled again. Outside, entire civilizations debated his right to be there. Inside, the creature that terrified the galaxy simply watched him walk closer. He stopped in front of it, close enough to feel its breath. "They think you're a weapon," he said softly. "They're wrong." Karath's tail swept lightly across the floor. It wasn't a reply, but it didn't need to be. The predator didn't move like a captive anymore. It stood as if it had already chosen where it belonged. In the distant void beyond the station's shield, Zal warships grew closer. The first sparks of a galactic confrontation were already beginning to flare. Elias placed a hand against Karatha's head, steady and unshaking. For the first time, the Predator didn't merely allow the touch. It leaned into it. That was the moment he knew the war to come wouldn't just be fought between fleets. It would be decided by what this creature had already done. It had chosen. And the galaxy, in its arrogance, still hadn't understood what that meant. The warning sirens rose in sharp, stuttering bursts, cutting through the hum of the station like blades. Council guards rushed down the corridors and practiced formations, but the edges of their discipline frayed under the weight of what loomed beyond the orbital shields. The Zal fleet had arrived, silent, black and uncomfortably close. Their ships didn't broadcast identification codes. They didn't have to. Everyone in the galaxy knew the Dominion's war signatures. Elias stood at the reinforced viewport of Command Deck 12, watching the fleet hang in the void like a closed fist. Their formation wasn't a threat. It was a statement. Behind him, delegates shouted over each other, each voice a strand of panic wrapped in diplomacy. The Council had sworn the station was neutral ground. The Dominion clearly disagreed. "They're hailing us again," Captain Imani said, stepping up beside him. The harsh blue light of the screens made her face look carved from steel. "Same message. Surrender the Karath or they'll breach." Elias didn't turn to face her. "Do they think I'm the one who has it? They think it belongs to them. You just happen to be standing in the way." The station trembled lightly as the Dominion ships shifted position. Every security team on the deck stiffened. Elias exhaled slowly through his nose. "Then we're out of time." The containment chamber was quieter than the rest of the station, a silence too heavy to be peace. Karath paced the edge of the reinforced barrier with an almost human stillness. It knew something was coming. Even before the sirens, its instincts had already mapped the storm. Elias entered without hesitation. The door sealed behind him, leaving only the low hum of the containment field. Karath stopped pacing and faced him directly. For eyes fixed on him, unblinking. The Predator's breath came heavier, but not in fear. Anticipation. "They're here," Elias said quietly. "Your old masters. They want to take you back." Karath didn't move at first. Then it lowered its head slowly and let out a low, resonant growl. It wasn't rage directed at him. It was the sound of something ancient, of an animal that had been forced to kneel once and refused to do it again. He stepped closer until he could feel its breath against his chest. The alarms continued to howl beyond the thick walls, but neither of them flinched. This bond wasn't built on commands. It was forged on something far quieter, far more dangerous than obedience. The first blast hit the shield an hour later. The station shuddered like a struck drum, and the world outside became streaks of light and flame. Dominion dropships descended in perfect, silent arcs toward the hangar. Council forces scrambled to repel them, but the Dominion soldiers were bred for this kind of war. Elias reached the arena just as the bulkhead doors began to creak under the external assault. The containment field flickered once, twice, before the emergency power grid rerouted. He keyed the access panel, overriding the Council's protocols. "Elias," Imani's voice crackled over his comm, "you can't be serious. They're not here to negotiate." His hand hovered over the last confirmation. "If I leave it in here, it dies. If I open it, maybe we both live." "You're talking about letting the deadliest thing in the galaxy loose on a crowded station." "I'm talking about trust," he said. Then he pressed the panel. The containment field dissolved with a hiss. Karath didn't explode outward as the guards had always feared. It simply stepped forward, stretching like a caged storm finally breathing. Its claws scraped against the metal floor, leaving faint scorches where the alloy heated under its weight. Elias met its gaze and gave a single, subtle nod. The Dominion strike team hit the bay moments later. Gunfire cracked against walls, doors buckled inward, and the smell of burning metal filled the air. 3 armored soldiers flooded the room. They didn't see a cage anymore. They saw the creature they believed belonged to them. They raised their weapons. Karath moved first. What followed wasn't chaos, it was precision. The Predator was not a beast raging blindly, it was a blade that had chosen its target. It tore through their formation with surgical violence, claws flashing in arcs of wet light. Armor meant nothing. Speed meant nothing. The sound of their weapons stuttered and died as quickly as the soldiers who held them. Elias didn't flinch. He moved behind the creature's flank, not because he controlled it, but because it made space for him without needing a word. Outside the bay, the fight escalated. The Dominion's assault teams clashed with station security, flashes of plasma cutting across the corridors. Elias and Karath pushed through the chaos like a single entity. The Predator leapt over a barricade, slamming into a squad before they could even register its presence. Soldiers who had trained their entire lives to fear the creature never imagined it would stand between them and a human. On the far end of the corridor, a blast ripped through a support column. Shrapnel and fire sprayed the walkway. Elias was thrown to the floor, his comms bursting into static. Karath whirled, its body positioning itself between him and the incoming storm of fire. Plasma struck its armored hide and scattered like rain on stone. For a heartbeat, the battlefield froze. Dominion soldiers stared as the apex predator, their supposed living god, shielded a human with its own body. The soldiers faltered. Karath didn't. It lunged with terrifying grace, and the corridor became a graveyard of their arrogance. When it returned to Elias's side, its breath steamed in the scorched air. It lowered its head again, close enough for him to hear the steady rhythm of its breathing beneath the chaos. Elias forced himself to his feet, blood trailing from a cut above his brow. "Good," he rasped. "We're not done." Imani's voice crackled back to life in his ear. "They've breached the central core. If they reach the reactor controls—" "They won't," Elias said. He looked at Karath. The creature met his gaze, still as stone, waiting. It wasn't following orders. It was choosing to move with him. They pushed deeper into the heart of the station, carving a path through fire and Dominion steel. Every corridor echoed with the sound of claws striking metal and soldiers shouting in disbelief. To those who watched the security feeds, it looked like a myth being rewritten in real time. By the time they reached the reactor hall, the Dominion strike leader was waiting. The commander's armor was etched with the sigils of the old faith, the same faith that had once knelt before Karatha's kind. His helmet retracted, revealing pale, scarred features and eyes burning with righteous fury. "You've corrupted what was pure," the commander spat. "You've made a god kneel to you." Elias didn't answer. Karath stepped forward, its growl rolling through the chamber like thunder. "I didn't make it kneel," Elias said finally. "It stood." The Dominion commander drew his blade, its edge singing with plasma. Karath answered the gesture with a sound that made the air itself shiver. The clash that followed wasn't between a soldier and a beast. It was between an empire clinging to its god and a creature that had decided it no longer belonged to anyone. When the commander fell, the Dominion soldiers faltered. The Predator roared, not as a weapon but as something no one could claim. Elias stood beside it, breathing hard, blood staining his collar. Outside the reactor bay, the Dominion fleet hung poised, waiting for a signal that would never come. The station's alarms slowly died down, leaving only the rasp of distant fires and the low, steady breath of the creature beside him. Karath turned its massive head toward him, amber eyes burning in the half-light. It wasn't a prisoner. It wasn't a god. It was a choice made flesh. And the galaxy, Elias realized, was about to learn what that meant. Smoke curled through the fractured corridors like silent ghosts, the remnants of battle clinging to the station's bones. Emergency lights bled a dull crimson across the decks, washing everything in the color of slow heartbeat and quiet dread. The Dominion fleet remained poised outside, a line of black warships encircling the orbital like vultures over a wounded beast. Elias stood on the upper gantry of the reactor chamber, looking down at the devastation. Dominion soldiers lay where they had fallen, weapons scattered like discarded prayers. Station personnel worked with hushed urgency, sealing breaches, dragging out the injured. In the center of it all, Karath crouched beside the cooling reactor vents, its breath still heavy but steady, eyes reflecting the flickering red light. It hadn't left his side through the entire storm. Captain Imani approached from the shadows of the stairwell. She carried the weight of command on her shoulders, the kind that pressed harder after a battle was technically won. "They've cut off communications with the outer sectors," she said. "We're boxed in. They're waiting for us to make the first move." Elias didn't look away from the viewport. "They want me to hand it over. They won't stop at that. You know what it means if they take Karath back." He did. Dominion propaganda would paint this day as a victory. The Predator would be paraded through their streets, leashed like an ancient god reclaimed. Every world they controlled would tremble harder, knowing even their monsters could be shackled again. But Elias had seen Karath fight, not for them, not for some imperial creed, but for him. That choice carried weight heavier than any gunship. Karath shifted its head at the sound of their voices. Its 4 golden eyes locked on Elias, unblinking. It didn't speak, it never needed to. Their bond wasn't built on words. Imani stepped closer, lowering her voice. They'll breach again if we don't act. We don't have enough power to keep the shield up. If they send their heavy carriers, this place won't hold for long. Then we stop waiting. Elias turned from the viewport and walked down the steel steps toward the creature. His boots crunched over cracked plating, every step loud in the stillness. Karath rose to its full height, taller than any soldier, every inch carved for war, and yet when Elias stood before it, it lowered its head slightly, a gesture that was neither submission nor dominance. A gesture of trust. We can't outgun them, Elias said softly. But we can outplay them. The council had never understood why the Dominion feared these creatures so much. Karath was not simply a weapon, it was a symbol. And symbols could burn empires down if wielded correctly. Imani followed him down, glancing between the man and the predator. You're thinking something reckless. He gave a faint, humorless smile. That's usually when it works. He keyed his comms into the station-wide channel. Static crackled, then silence, then his voice cut through the darkness like a scalpel. This is Elias Ward. Dominion Command, I know you're listening. You wanted your god back. You've been circling us like a pack of scavengers waiting for someone to blink. I'm done blinking. On the Dominion bridge, 100 eyes would be narrowing. They expected desperation. They weren't prepared for defiance. I'm walking out with Karath, Elias continued. Right to your doorstep. No shields. No hostages. If you think you can leash it again, come try. Imani stared at him, incredulous. That's suicide. He met her eyes with an iron calm. No. That's war on our terms. Karatha's claws scraped against the floor as it followed him toward the bay doors. Its steps echoed like thunder in an empty canyon. Dominion spotlights stabbed through the docking field, illuminating the cracked hull of the station. Drop ships hovered in formation, waiting for the order to strike. The airlock hissed open, bleeding cold vacuum air into the hangar. Elias stepped forward with Karath beside him, two figures against a sky full of warships. He didn't carry a weapon. He didn't need one. Karatha's presence alone made entire platoons hesitate. A Dominion commander's voice thundered through the external speakers. Surrender the asset, human. Walk away alive. Resist, and this station burns with you in it. Elias tilted his head, the faintest shadow of a smirk cutting across his bloodied face. Funny thing, he said quietly, knowing the open comm would carry every word. You still think it belongs to you. The Dominion soldiers braced for the order to fire. Karath moved. Not like a beast lunging, but like a storm rising. Its roar ripped through the hangar, reverberating against the hull plates, shaking the foundations of every ship within range. It wasn't just sound. It was a memory, the kind woven into the bones of every soldier who'd been raised to fear its kind. Before the first shot was fired, Karath leapt. Its massive form shot through the weightless air like a spear, colliding with the nearest Dominion carrier with bone-shattering force. Armor split. Turret screamed. Fire erupted into the void. Elias moved with surgical precision behind it, sprinting across the hangar deck toward the seized transport vessel. Dominion forces opened fire, but their aim faltered. Fear was contagious. The creature was more than teeth and claws, it was the collapse of everything they'd built their control on. Karath tore through the second drop ship, ripping a path wide enough for Elias to board the Dominion transport. He keyed in the override codes Imani had smuggled him years ago, and the engines came alive with a low growl. Imani, he barked into the comm, shield every corridor you can and pull the survivors. When this ship breaches their line, you run like hell. You better not die out there, she said, her voice tight. I don't plan on it. The transport lifted off just as Karath vaulted back onto the hull. Its claws sank deep into the metal plating, anchoring itself like it had done this 1,000 times before. Dominion fighters swarmed in, but Karath struck them out of the sky with terrifying precision, shredding their wings, tearing through their armor, hurling their pilots into the void. The fleet broke formation. That was the point. Dominion order relied on fear being one-directional. But when fear ran both ways, order shattered. Elias slammed the controls forward, steering the transport straight toward the Dominion command ship. Plasma fire stitched the blackness around them, but Karath moved across the hull like a living weapon, intercepting shots, deflecting them with its armored body. Every strike only made it roar louder. They pierced through the Dominion line like a knife through fabric. Alarms shrieked through the enemy flagship as the transport rammed into its docking spine. The impact shook the vessel like a thunderclap. Elias staggered to his feet, unbuckling as the docking clamps fused around the hull. He met Karatha's eyes through the fractured cockpit glass. No words. just a shared understanding. Dominion soldiers swarmed the docking bay. Elias stepped through the breach with the Predator at his side. Not behind him. Beside him. This was no rescue. No escape. This was a storm. Karath tore through the vanguard while Elias advanced with cold precision, cutting down soldiers who stumbled between awe and terror. The closer they got to the command bridge, the louder the silence became, the kind that grows in the wake of collapsing empires. At the bridge doors the Dominion admiral waited. Silver armor gleamed under harsh lights, his face twisted into something between fury and disbelief. "You think this ends with you?" he spat. "You've doomed yourself. You've doomed everyone." Elias lifted his chin. "No," he said evenly. "I ended your god. What's left is just you." Karath roared, a sound that shattered the steel calm of the Dominion. Soldiers faltered. The bridge shuddered as the Predator lunged. When it was over, the Dominion flagship burned silently against the void, their formation fractured, their fleet scattering like a hive with its queen struck down. Elias stood at the ruined viewport, Karath beside him, both of them lit by the glow of fires drifting into the black. The galaxy would whisper about this day. Not because a human tamed a monster, but because a Predator everyone feared had chosen where it stood. And this time it wasn't at their feet. It was at his side.